This PowerPoint will walk you through completing your travel expense report. Remember, help is available both on the Teams Finance Instructions page and on the screens in Teams at the top. Be sure and read the text. This screen just shows you an overview of the process. You started with a travel request that was already created and approved. Then you went on your trip. Now that you've come back, then you need to file an expense report. That expense report will be tied to that initial travel request. Once your expense report is reviewed and approved, then you'll be reimbursed. So you've come back from your trip. It's time to put in the expense report. That expense report will be put in the same module that your initial travel request was put in. So if your travel request was put in the Employee Service Center, that's where you're going to put in your expense report. And remember, if you use the Employee Service Center, then your travel voucher does not have to be signed. It does need to be attached, but you do not have to physically sign that travel voucher. If someone else put in your travel request through the main Teams program, then that person can put in your expense report through the main Teams program. But you do have to physically sign that travel voucher. In either the travel module or in the Employee Service Center, choose Create Expense Report. So you can tell that this looks just like the travel request entry, but we've chosen to input a travel expense report. So here we are, and we have two travel requests to choose. You can tell that this is not in the Employee Service Center. This is rather in the main Teams program, since this is for two different people. But you come here and you choose the appropriate one. If this were in the Employee Service Center, you might have two trips here, and you would need to choose the one that you want to work on. So here the first travel request has been chosen to be edited, and you can see at the bottom, here is where we might change the times. If we left at a different time, returned at a different time. Even if the date changed, you could change that here. So here's where you want to be sure and put in the actual date and time of the travel. This is also where you're going to attach one document that has all the required forms and receipts. So anything that we need to reimburse you, this is where you're going to attach it in one document. One of the purposes of this expense report is to gather all of the cost for this one trip into one place. So in this scenario, a check had been written earlier to TASBO for this registration fee of $350. So the check was written, it was already sent. That happened long before the trip. But after the fact, when you're completing your expense report, even if a check has already been mailed to the vendor, you're going to go ahead and put in the actual amount here. That ought to be the same as what we paid them, because we would know exactly what it costs to register you. So go ahead and put in that actual amount here. If you did pay for registration yourself, then obviously you would put this here, and it would be payment type reimbursement. This is the lodging tab, and in this scenario, the employee is being reimbursed for the lodging. And here's where you put the actual amount. Note that the projected amount is slightly different. They ought to be pretty close, but nevertheless, this amount right here is what actually costs. Now be sure that this agrees to your hotel receipt, and also be sure that you're not claiming any state occupancy tax. Because a district vehicle was chosen initially on this travel request, there was no expense here on vehicle, but it could happen that you might not have gotten a district vehicle and then you had to drive your own car. In that case, you go down here and you choose Add, and then you can put in the appropriate cost. Once you've got the information in here at the top with the people who rode in the car, the actual mileage, Teams will calculate the actual amount based on the current mileage rate. Then you have to choose Add here. Once you choose Add, that item is moved down to the bottom under Vehicle Expenses. So if you needed to change something about it, you would highlight that row and choose Edit. When you're through, hit Continue. For most district travel, airlines are not required. And so when you come to this airline tab, you simply choose Continue at the bottom. If you did pay for some airline tickets that you need to be reimbursed for, this is where you would enter that information. Here's the Meals tab when you first come to it. Note that the actual amounts are all zeros. So when you first put in your travel request, you thought that lunch was going to be provided. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. Maybe breakfast was provided and you didn't know it was going to be. So here's your chance to go ahead and change those selections. The meals on this expense report are being paid for by a grant, and grants can only pay for the actual meal amounts. Grants cannot pay per diem amounts. Grants cannot reimburse for tips. So in this scenario, you must put your actual meal amounts. Notice that there is one dinner there where the full per diem amount of $22 is claimed. That means that this employee spent more than $22. Their actual cost might have been $23 or $24, but they can only claim the max of $22. On this meal tab, the employee is being paid by local funds, and so the per diem amount is being claimed. They don't have to put their actual amount, they can put the per diem amount. Once you're done, you save your changes. Here's the Other Expenses tab. Note in this scenario that there is not a check mark by Other Expenses, which means that nothing was entered on the initial travel request, so you could just choose Continue here if there were no other expenses. However, if you had some other expenses that you didn't anticipate, this is where you could go ahead and add them. So you would choose Add here at the bottom. If you've chosen to add an other expense, then you would find the expense name and put in the amount. Once you've completed your other expense, then choose the add that is right below the account code. On this Other Expenses tab, both parking and cab fare have been added. If you needed to add something else, you could go ahead and add it. If you're through, then you choose Continue. Once you've been through all the tabs, then you come here to the summary. And so now you can look it over and make sure that your actual amounts are correct. Make sure that you've gotten everything in. And if you're done, then you hit Submit. Supervisors will go to the expense report approval. Although this expense report has already been approved, you can see what the supervisor would see when coming here to approve. Financial Services is here to help. Your campus or department secretary is also very capable of helping you complete this. Thanks for watching.